Today's scripture passage is found in the book of Luke, chapter 14, starting at verse 1. One Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, "Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on the Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" And they could not reply to these things. Now he told a parable to those who were invited, when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, "When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do you do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he invited you, both will come and say to you, 'Give your place to this person.' And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, move up higher.' Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at a table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." And he said also to the man who had invited him, "When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just." When one of those who reclined at the table with him heard these things, he said to him, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." But he said to him, "A man once gave a banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a field and I must go out and see to it. Please have me excused.' Another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I go to examine them. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, 'Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and crippled and blind and lame.' And the servant said, 'Sir, what you commanded has been done, and still there is room.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go out to the highways and the hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet.' Amen."
One of the great descriptions of heaven is of this great banquet that we've read of. It's a picture of a time where people from all generations will be there. It's a time where people from all cultures, countries, people groups will be there. And the way in which that Jesus talks about this party, it's going to be the party of all parties. If you're going to party, this is the party that you want to be at. And the question really ends up being, why can't you do that here? Why can't you have a big banquet here? Why is it that we have to wait for that party on that day? What's going to be so different? Is it going to be a different host, different setting, a different people? And when we look into this passage, he speaks of this future banquet because he's at a party in the beginning of this passage. He's at a bad party. And by bad, I don't mean good. I mean bad. It's a bad party. And because of this party that he's at, it bothers him what kind of party this is. And you may be thinking of many different kinds of parties. It's not that kind of party. But something in this party grieves him so much, he ends up teaching about this idea of why this party in heaven will be so different. And in it, we start to realize a huge important lesson that we need to understand in terms of how we will be different on that day. And so as we begin, we're going to ask a question that the Black Eyed Peas asked. Where is the love? Ask your neighbor, where is the love? Where is the love? Verse 1. One Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. They invite Jesus. Jesus comes over. Good news, right? They're talking. They're at the table. But you see that they were watching him carefully. And then what happens in verse 2? And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. Dropsy is an older term for edema. Edema is a condition where in your tissue there's a lot of fluid that would form. And so it wasn't a severe condition, but a condition nonetheless. And so, just by chance, the Pharisees are eagerly watching him, and oh, behold, there's this man who has dropsy, who has edema. It seems like a setup, right? It seems like this setup. But Jesus doesn't care that he's being set up, because when he sees a man who is in need, he is going to approach him and do what he would, regardless of the agenda of the other people, because that is Jesus. He loves people, and he won't let anyone or anything stop him in this mission to love people. And so as he's being set up, as he recognizes this, he sets them up. So in verse 3, before healing them, he asked this question. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? So that's the setup. Is it lawful, Pharisees, to heal on the Sabbath or not? And then what does it say in verse 4? But they remained silent. So you wonder, how long did Jesus ask this question? How long was that silence? Pharisees, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Right? You just wonder how much tension Jesus, is trying to, wait to build. And then he continues. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And that's it. The story is not about the healing. It's about something else. And you have to kind of wonder, why would it not be about the healing? A healing is a big thing. It was life-changing for this man. And Jesus' point is other. Luke's point is other in verse 5. And he said to him, which of you, having a son or an ox that have fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out? And they could not reply to these things. There is so much wrong with this party. Who of you would want to be invited to be a party to be set up? A man with dropsy is healed. And there's no excitement. No one is celebrating. No one is saying, oh, this is great what you have done, Jesus. Because their minds, the Pharisees, are on something completely different than the well-being of a human being. There's no celebration. There is no excitement. They don't even care for him, because Jesus' response is, if you had a son, if you had an ox, an animal that fell into some sort of ditch and they needed to be helped on the Sabbath day, would you not help your son, let alone an animal? They have nothing to say afterwards. Jesus has revealed to them what's wrong with their heart. He is bothered by this. Where is the love, right? How could it be that a human being, a group of people, seeing a man healed from sickness has no interest or care of the healing? How is it that people, you and I, can live in a world with so much pain but not care? That's what Jesus is getting at. Because he sees this problem, where is the love? Where is your compassion for your neighbor? He now goes on to explain what is going on, why it's possible that a human being can actually have no love for their neighbor. And so we're talking about now the enemy of love. Something is the enemy of love. What is it? What could it be that can, within a soul, within the heart of a man, a heart of a woman, that they have no compassion in a moment when someone is healed? And so he addresses this question, why we are so loveless as a people. He first addresses the guest in verse 7. Now he told a parable to those who were invited, and when he noticed how they chose the place of honor, he goes on then to share this parable. And that's a hint. Why don't we love as people? How could it be that when there's so much pain in the world that we can continue to live our comfortable lives? This is what Jesus says. When he noticed that they cared about sitting in the place of honor, that's a hint. He then goes on to tell this parable. And this parable is a simple story, right? When you go into some sort of setting, don't sit in the place of honor, but sit in the place where the lowly would sit, the humble would sit. So that one, you're not shamed when someone else more distinguished comes in, but also two, someone else would honor you. And that's basically the principle of this. And so as we read it, I'm not sure how much it resonates with us. Many of us don't come from an honor and shame culture. And so as we read this, we don't really understand. But for those of us who come from maybe an Asian culture, you have a little bit of a better understanding of this real big importance of honor and shame. At a church that I was serving at, there was that sense, and nothing wrong with honor and shame culture. It's just a different culture than Western culture. And so at this church that I was a part of, we would have these staff meetings, and the church was very large. And so during our staff meetings, it was basically two rows of chairs facing each other pre-COVID, and so you're able to sit closely together in a room. And in the inner circle would be kind of like the people who are kind of leading a ministry. And in the outer circle, the outer row would be those who aren't leading a ministry. And so for me as an assistant pastor of an English-speaking ministry, I had no business being in the inner row. And so whenever I found myself where there aren't many seats available, usually it's at the end of that row. And so it's okay to sit there. But if I ever had to, and by chance sometimes I just had to because there were no seats available, I would sit in the middle, and it was really awkward for me. No one told anybody this rule, but you just understood that the more important people, or at least the people who are leading ministries, and this is nothing bad, but those who have updates to share to the rest of the leadership, they would be sitting in the inner circle. But then there's this one seat where the senior pastor would sit. Now I would never sit there. And if I did, maybe I just had no idea what the custom was, and maybe it was my first, Tuesday at a staff meeting, and if I was to go up there, someone would come up to me and be like, hey, you're not supposed to sit here. And how would I feel? It's that, even in this polite setting, this sense of shame, oh, shoot, I messed up, I shouldn't sit there. I am not the senior pastor. And so I would, walk away to the second outer circle. And it's that setting, even in a polite setting, you sense, everyone understands where the seats of honor are. And Jesus gets at that. And I think it's interesting. It took me a while to understand what is the big deal, right? What is the big deal? What's the big deal about wanting to sit in the seat of honor? You see, in this passage, the big difference was everybody was trying to sit in the seat of honor, right? He sees the guests, and they were all vying for different seats within the party. That's what he sees. I mean, could you imagine? In any of the parties that we go to, for all of us, our social antenna is up, right? We know what the customs are. We're trying to figure out how you say hi in this party setting, right? So we're all doing this on some level. And just imagine there's these seats within the party, and everybody is trying to, compete in one sense to sit at the honored seats. Imagine the stress. Imagine the politics. Oh, did you see where he sat? Who does he think he is? And as Jesus sees this unfold before him, that's why he addresses. When he sees the people not celebrating the healing of someone who is sick, he doesn't rail on them for their lack of love. He shows them the enemy of love. It's this desire. It's this desire for self-promotion. Why do we live in such a loveless world? The reason the world is so broken is not because everyone's filled with so much hate, but because everyone is filled with so much self. That's what Jesus is getting at. When you see the world around, it's evident, it's clear. There are great needs within Seoul, within the city that you grew up in every generation, in every culture, there were always those who were poor. I mean, think about that. The poor is not a recent phenomenon, but in every generation, in every culture, in every country, in every big city, there are always people in great, great need who are poor. And it's not because everyone is out to get each other. It's that everyone is filled with this obsession of self. And so when he sees the Pharisees and their loveless heart, he doesn't accuse them of the hate, he accuses them of the pride, the self-ambition. We're so busy self-promoting that because we are so self-obsessed. So in verse 11, the way he describes it, for everyone who exalts himself, it's that same word of Christ being exalted on the cross, right? It's that idea of almost glory. We try to glory ourselves, worship ourselves, exalt ourselves. The reason the world has all the issues that it does, it's not because there's a few people who are completely evil. It's because all the mass of people were self-obsessed, we're proud, we're self-seeking. You see, it's super interesting, isn't it? They couldn't celebrate the healing of a sick man because they loved themselves. It wasn't an evil desire. They just were looking out for themselves. And if you think about it, this is how the world turns, right? Self-obsession. It's the blood that flows in our veins. This is how we're wired. To find someone different, you don't. Right? It's the motor in which how the world turns. And that is why in every generation, in every people group, there are those who are poor, those who are marginalized. That's why in every school, it's not that necessarily the bullies of a school are really trying to hurt somebody, but they're so eager, ambitious to self-exalt. Their hearts are filled with themselves. And that's what Jesus is getting at. And if you can understand that, it's a huge indictment to what? To us, is it not? And then he goes on, right? The life of love, right? So we're moving on to the life of love now. he's talked about where's the love, the enemy of love, and then now he's going to show us what this kind of love looks like. So he shares this next parable. He also said to the man who had invited him. So now he's turning to the guest. When you give dinner or a banquet, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do you not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid? But when you give a feast, invite who? The poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Anybody been to a party where that was the guest list? None of us, right? I'm pretty sure none of us have been to a party like this. As I read this, I think, how? Who would do this? Who would do this? Who would have a party to invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind? It doesn't make any sense. And I think that is Jesus' point. We would never think about doing this because we as a people are self-obsessed. We're always looking out for ourselves. When we go to a party, we're thinking about us and where the seat of honor is. And the way in which it plays out for all of us is all very different. And then he shows us the danger of this self-obsession. How dangerous is this? In this parable, right, he says, a man gave a great banquet and invited many. In verse 16. In verse 17, and at the time for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, come, for everything is now ready. So it's this picture, this new story, this new parable. It's this master. He throws this massive party, this banquet. And he actually does this. He invites those who are in need. But he doesn't do that right away. This host is different. So he still invites the friends. Right? He still invites those on his guest list. But in this guest list, 3 reject. I come, for everything is now ready. In verse 18. But they all began to make excuses. The first said to him, I have bought a field. I must go out and see it. Please have me excused. He's not finalizing a deal for property. He's purchased it. And as he's purchased it, he says his reason is, I have to go and see it. Please have me excused. Jesus gives us no further detail. Did he have to sign that night? No, he's already purchased it. Is there something in need in that field? We don't know, and that's, I think, Jesus' point. All he wants us to know, the reason this man gives this reason, this excuse for not to attend the master's party, is simply that he has property. Someone's property was important enough for them to refuse the master's invitation. And then goes on. The next man who gives this excuse, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I will go to examine them. Please have me excused. He buys 10 oxen. I don't know how much that is. A lot of money. Why does he buy it? To have pets? I mean, probably not. It was probably purchased to farm his land. So he has to go examine them. And so now this is a little bit more legitimate of a reason. It's a lot of money on the line. This is his livelihood. And so he tells the master, I can't come. Please excuse me because I have to check to see if these oxen are in good condition. But again, all Jesus wants us to know is that for this man, someone's work was more important to refuse the master's invitation. And then the last story that Jesus shares, the last man says, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. I have no idea what this means, right? Is it that the wife doesn't want him to come? Jesus doesn't give any detail. All Jesus cares about is to let us know that someone has in mind that love, that marriage, that family is a good enough reason in their mind to reject the master's invitation. And the question that you and I, we have to ask is, are these legitimate reasons? Because these are all things that are very relevant for us. Is property a good reason to say no to a banquet? Is work an important reason to say no to a banquet? Is love an important enough reason, marriage, family, to say no? I think that is Jesus' point. One commentator says it this way: therein lies the point of the parable, for even good excuses for refusing the banquet are not good enough. But when you think about it, from our point of view, it may be a good reason. But when you hear it in this third-party form, you kind of feel that it's clearly lame. It's a lame reason to say no to this banquet that this master has prepared for months. You've known about it. All you need to do is save the date, mark it on your calendar, and when the day comes, right, your property will still be there the next day. The oxen will still be there the next day. Your wife will hopefully still be there the next day. And the idea is, what is the big deal to attend this party of this master who's prepared this banquet for months, where you can eat and dine with the master and eat with the master? See, no one is saying money is not important. Property is very important. The older that you grow, you recognize the importance of property. To be able to buy an apartment here in Korea is a big deal. Many young families are very stressed about getting an apartment because by doing that, you can actually accrue real wealth. No one is saying money is not important. Money is a gift. Proverbs talks about how we should save. So Jesus is not saying money is not important. But he is saying money is a lame reason to refuse God. No one is saying work is not important, right? Work is a part of the creation mandate. God created Adam and Eve as gardeners, not as a pastor, not as a missionary, as gardeners. They literally worked the ground. They took care of the animals. In that, it was God glorifying. It was their purpose. It was their calling. For all of us, we may not have an occupation. Some of us do, some of us don't. But we all find a sense of purpose to serve a company, to serve an organization, to take care of our children. And in that, those are good things. And again, what Jesus is saying is work is an important thing. Finding the way in which you can serve and contribute is an important thing. But what Jesus is saying is that work, no matter how important it is a lame reason to reject God. And then lastly, love. Right, love, this one is, I think, the most interesting because this man gives no reason. He just says, I'm married, and then he doesn't even ask to be excused. He thinks the statement, I am married, is sufficient for him to not go to the party. And I think, again, that is Jesus' point. I think it's in this example that we see most clearly that to be single is a good thing, right? Being married is no better than being single, right? You are complete in your singleness. There is no need to get married. If you do find someone to get married, that's great as well. And so it's in this the most clear. We would argue that money, you cannot live without money, right? I think we could all agree we need some fundamental source of income for money. We all need it to have a sense of calling, a sense of purpose in our lives. Those two things are actually good things God has given you. To be married is not necessary. For Apostle Paul was not married. Jesus was not married. And in that, this man thinks that's a good enough reason to reject the master's request for the banquet. And I think it's in that we recognize what is going on. It's these good things that we have been given, and we make it ultimate. Because there is no legitimate and good reason to say no and refuse the king. You see, we overvalue the good things in our lives. And that's Jesus, what he's getting at. It's not that you're going to reject God because of all these other greater evil things. It's often the good things of money, work, marriage that will be the great challenge of your faith, to make the good thing of money ultimate, to make the good thing of work ultimate, to make the good thing of love, marriage, family the ultimate. You see, we overvalue the good things in our lives because we overvalue ourselves. Because he ties it back to the previous point. The people could not celebrate the healing of a man because they were consumed with themselves. And when they were consumed with themselves, they were then therefore consumed with their own possessions. Let me ask you, what's bigger? The sun, the physical sun that we orbit around, is that bigger or is your thumb bigger? We all know the answer, right? The thumb, right? Because I can block out the sun when I do this, right? You see what pride does? It skews the perspective of how you see the world. Clearly the sun is bigger. But when I bring my thumb closer to myself, that thumb is big enough where now I can't see any of you. And that's what pride does. It skews your perspective. And so when you see money, oh, money is important. When you get that raise, it's very helpful. When you get that job and you're able to pay off your debts, it's very helpful. Work is very important. Marriage is a great blessing. And all these things, there's nothing wrong with it. And that's the issue. There's nothing wrong with it. But we tend to overvalue these things because they're closer to us. And that's what pride is. Because we overvalue ourselves, we overvalue the things around us. It's like the thumb. It looks big and great and important when we all know clearly, objectively, God is bigger, God is better, God is greater. But because this thing is so large in front of us, it overshadows God. And so these lame reasons become good reasons in our hearts and in our lives. Well, God, I've got this other thing going on. I'm just going to put you in the back burner. God, you know how important my work is in this situation. God, you understand. And we think these things is everything. Because it's like the thumb. It's closer to us, so it seems bigger, more important. But it's only because we overvalue ourselves. It's like we see with a fisheye lens, right? Things in front of us are large and big, but we can't see the people out there. We can't see those who are hurting. We can't see God. And so we continue to live our lives with these important things. We don't have a malicious heart. We're not trying to hurt people, and that's Jesus' point. The reason that party in heaven will be so different than any party that you've attended is because the parties that we attend here, everyone is simply looking out for themselves. But the party there, people will love you, will care for you. They will love God and they will love their neighbor. That's why it's going to be so different. See, pride skews the way that we see things. And pride makes our things, ourselves, look bigger than God. And so how do we then live like this? How do we then actually change how we live? How can we be freed from self-obsession? You have to meet the master. You have to meet this master that he talks of. You have to meet this master who is obsessed with the guests. He is a man obsessed with the guest. So in verse 21, the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became very angry and said to his servants, "Go out quickly to the streets and the lanes of the city and bring in the poor and crippled, blind, and lame." You see, the master's heart, he invites the first group. He gives this example of who says no. So he doesn't end there. He doesn't just simply count his loss. He doesn't simply end the party there because he's got what? Food to give, seats at the table. He knows people will be blessed by this, so he is obsessed. He will not end the party. So what does he do? He invites the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. And then in verse 22, what do we see? Sir, what you have commanded has been done. Still there is room. And the master, obsessed, said to his servant, go out to the highways, the hedges, and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. And it's not that he simply wants his house filled. He wants to share the wealth that he has. He wants to share the meal that he has. He's got seats at the table, and he wants people to sit with him. And then in verse 24, as we finish, he transitions. He stops talking about the parable, and then now he is the master talking to the actual guests in front of him. We're brought back to the very beginning of all of this, when he is with the Pharisees who had no love when they saw the man who was sick, and they had no love for him. He addresses now them, these guests, in verse 24. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste what? My banquet. He says, my banquet. He is the master. That's what he's saying. He is the master. The storyteller becomes the master. And what we learn is that this master in the parable, he tells his servant, hey, go out. But what's actually happening in this? God himself doesn't tell a servant to go. God himself comes and he goes. He bridges the heavens. He doesn't just go into the street. He bridges the heavens, comes to earth. Why? Invites us so that we would feast with him, so that we would sit and dine with him. You see, this whole story is about the host. It's actually not about the guest. The main character is the host. It's about his unrelenting heart, his obsession for his people. And so he continues to send out invitation after invitation after invitation to bless the people. And so as the people come, it's the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. It's them who comes. And it's Jesus that says, come to this party, for everything is now ready. He is the humble host. He invites the people. What's so beautiful about this, that he's also the humble guest. He is the guest that we never were. Because if we're honest, we're guilty of all the things that he's accused the Pharisees of. Self-seeking men and women. But he's the humble guest, right? Philippians 2, how does it describe Jesus? Christ Jesus, who, though he was the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking up the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, being found in human form, what? He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has exalted him. God has highly exalted him, bestowing on him the name that is above every name. What does Jesus say in the beginning? When you humble yourself, God will exalt you. He is the humble guest that we never were. He is obsessed with us. He makes sure that we can come in. And so he is the humble guest. And so when we enter into that party, we use Christ's ticket, because he filled the requirements of what it meant to be in that meal. He provides us for what we need. He is exalted when he is humbled. And you know what Jesus' first miracle was? It was at a wedding. There was no more wine. What do you do at a party? You drink some wine. So he recognizes this is a big deal. Let's make some wine. Let's make great wine. And then, Mary, his mother, asks him, do something. And then Jesus' response is, woman, my time has not yet come. Why does he say that? What's he thinking about? He's at a wedding thinking about his wedding, when the church will be with him. He's at a party, and all he's thinking about is this great party that will happen when all people from all generations will come. The poor, the sick, but even the rich will come because of Christ. Don't you see Christ? He is that master host. He is obsessed with us. When do you learn to let go of your selfish ambition? When you learn that the master is obsessed with us, that's when we're freed to be obsessed with others. Until you understand God is obsessed, He cares for you, He loves you, He knows what you know. Until you know the master, you will continue to fend for yourself and vie for that seat of honor because you feel like you have to. Who else will look out for you? How do you actually humble yourself here in our lifetime when everyone is out to get you? It's impossible until you understand that there is a master who knows you, calls you, invites you personally. It's that man. That's why the party will be so great. Because imagine this banquet when everyone knows you, genuinely loves you, loves the Lord. That's the party that He refers to, and that is the party that He invites you to. Let's pray.